Hi, welcome everyone. I'm today's lecturer, Jonathan Kim. I'm going to talk briefly about Korean film industry and international co-production. To begin with, I'd like to show you a little bit about Korean film industry. Now, this is a list of top 20 all-time box office winners. And as you can see here, there are only 4 American Hollywood films. And the top one is Avengers: The Endgame. And I think in most of the countries, like a lot of the Marvel films are in top 20s, but in Korea, it's a very different. As you can see, Korean film audiences love their own movies. So #1 film is called The Admiral, Roaring Currents, with the admission of 17,600,000 people. You know, Korea has a population of about 52 million. So this means about 33% of the Korean population has seen this movie, which is amazing, actually. And in order to be on top 20, at least 20% of the population has to see the movie. So this actually shows how much Korean people love movies. I think the average film going rate in Korean audience is about 4.3 times a year. This was, of course, before the pandemic. So when you look at the top box office movie, The Admiral, the total gross box office is about 123 million US dollars. That's actually quite a bit of amount of box office. So as you can see, Korea is not a small market. I can show you later on compared to other territories in the world. Let's look at the Korean film industry at glance. Let's look at three different parts as the revenue stream from Korean film industry. One, theatrical revenue, and the digital online revenue, and the international revenue. So when you look at 2019 revenue, that's 1.7 billion US dollars. Actually, this amount is in Korean won, 100 million Korean won. So the exchange rate is about 1,100 to $1. So basically you can calculate. So this is about 1.6, 1.7 billion US dollars. And actually, due to the pandemic, it has shrunk to about $500 million, which is a minus 73%. I'm sure it's the same everywhere in the world. I'm sure in your countries, you probably have a similar decrease in theatrical revenue. But when you look at previous years, in early 2010s, the theatrical revenue consists of about over 80% of the total movie revenue. But these days, it's gone down to, from 2016, it's around 75%. And of course, the theatrical revenue from 2020 was only 48.4%. Obviously, the online revenue has increased to 42%. So this is it's probably the same everywhere. People watch movies more online than theaters due to the pandemic. Theaters are either closed or they can take only 30% of the capacities. So this actually reflects a very good number, 30% of the capacity. So the theatrical revenue gone down by 70%. So it makes sense. And then we go down to international revenues. They start counting from 2016. They divided the revenue stream with sales of the completed films with film services. Now, sales of a completed film has actually gone up last year. I think this is due to many OTT or internet or TV broadcasters needed content. So they were able to sell pretty well last year, although they weren't doing so well in the theaters. And the service-wise, this actually includes VFX, CG, and or action choreography, and etc. and etc. And actually, how do you export action choreographer? You'll be surprised. A lot of the Korean action directors go to China, or even in India. They're quite big in India these days to use Korean action choreographer to do their films. So, as you can see, in 2017, we had as high as around $80 million in revenue. This is due to a lot of the CG work, VFX work from China had come to Korea, but after Korea banned from China, this has actually decreased to this much. So as you can see, last year, the service sector didn't do so well. However, due to the good performance by selling completed films, last year's international revenue has gone up from the previous years. So as a total, we had a 58% decrease last year because of the pandemic, whereas we're having continuous increase of, on the average, around 5% increase every year. Let's see what happens next year. I'm sure this year is probably as bad as last year, but hopefully everybody's getting vaccinated here in Korea. We already, as of today, we are around 20% vaccination rate in Korea. So by the fourth quarter, I think we'll probably see a surge of revenue streams, every sector of this revenue stream. Next, let's look at the history. Early 90s, this is when I started film career. You look at this chart, that yellow straight lines are market share by Korean film. And the blue line here is the number of admissions by Korean films. And this green line is total admissions, including imported films and Hollywood major films. And this red line is increase in the population. I'm sure this will start go down pretty soon because we have a decrease in the population. Now, when you look at this chart, early 90s up to 1997, Korean films weren't doing so well. It had as low as 15.9% market share, meaning not so many people went to see Korean films. They mostly preferred foreign films. Of course, the Korean films, the quality wasn't so great back then. And also, as a total market, we only had around 500 cinemas with 500 screens. And then around 1999, we started having multiplexes. So as of today, we have about 3,300 screens now. So it's a different story. However, when you look at the market share of Korean films, it has gone up quite a bit. So what happened? I think on many of you South Asian countries, you have pretty low local film market share, I'm sure, because it's very difficult to compete with Hollywood major films because they use millions of dollars in budget. We can't use that much money as a budget because of the market size. But starting 1999, I think because of this movie called Shiri, I don't know, some of you remember this movie, this actually broke Titanic's record in Korea. Korea was the only country that had a local movie break the record of Titanic anywhere in the world. So a lot of people from overseas actually had noticed the Korean market, and also Korean government realized, okay, Korean movies could make money and it could be something good to promote the country also, because that movie, Shiri, went to Hong Kong, Japan, and became #1 at the box office. So the government started supporting the film industry. So they had put up around $20 million as a seed money for film funds, so which has actually carried film industry up to now. And you can see from year 2000, market share has started to go up to 50%. On the year 2003 and 2004, we had two films which actually set a record of 10 million admissions. So from then on, Korean films start to take off. And right now we're at around 50%, and it's not really increasing or decreasing. So it's very stable. Stable is a good word, but stale is probably the better word, which means Korean film needs to find another way for breakthrough, which I think is international. So that's why I wanted to talk about the co-production. So many of you who has a very low market share for your own local films, you look at this chart and you need to have hope. So look at this. You look at this growth in market, the total market size. if the local film market share increases, it does not eat away the total market. It actually helps grow the whole pie, you see? So if local film does well, it actually drives the total industry. So just remember that. At least that's what happened in Korea, and I'm sure it'll happen in your countries too. Next, okay, where are we sitting in the worldwide situation here? This is the data from MPAA, Motion Picture Association of the United States, America. Of course, naturally, USA is still number 1. Number 2 is China. Number 3 is Japan. Number 4 is South Korea. Actually, this is a roundabout number. So UK, France, India, Germany, we're around same, but I guess we're a little bit in front of them. So we're number 4. It's quite incredible. A small country like Korea is number 4 in the total box office. As I said before, so Korean people love going to the cinemas. And those of you from Asian countries, look at these countries. China's number 2, Japan's number 3, India's number 7, Taiwan is number 15, Indonesia is number 17, UAE, we consider Middle East Asia, is number 19, and Malaysia is number 20. So there are quite a bit of Asian countries that are in top 20 box office countries in the world also. So I think that's why they're noticing Asia as their big market. So because we're number 4 in the world, that's why we see a lot of the American actors coming to Korea to promote the movie. And also another thing is, usually Korea opens the movie first in the world. Korean premiere is usually a day or 2 days before United States premiere. I don't know why. Maybe because United States, their movie opening day is on Friday, and Korea usually either Wednesday or Thursday. I don't know why this actually became a common practice, but that's why usually the big films, Korea opens a day or 2 before United States. And a lot of the American actors come to Korea to promote their films, and they love coming here because they have a great fan base. And of course, they love Korean food also, I guess. So, and that's another reason you should be considering doing some films with Korean filmmakers and do co-productions, because look at this. You probably heard this news before. Netflix is spending nearly 500 million on Korean contents this year. This was announced in February this year in this Forbes article. And of course, why are they doing this? Because Korean contents are doing quite well in Asia usually. And sometimes it actually performs better than Hollywood films or Hollywood contents in Asia. So they have realized it with a few of the things like Crash Landing on You, The Kingdom, and a few things like that. And they realize that Korean content does really well in Asia. So they decide to actually spend this kind of money on Korean contents. And also our local company, CJ has committed 4.5 billion to content creation in a 5-year global push. But of course, this is not only for movies or visual contents. It includes music, performing arts, and other things, publishing and things like that. So, however, this is a big amount of money, and CJ would like to become the biggest studio in Asia. And I think they are doing quite well on the entertainment sector. So they know things work. And also they actually distributed and invested in Parasite, and they were able to receive Academy Awards. So of course they are very excited about putting this kind of money into content creation. So we have a big market. We have some funding. So this gives you all the reasons to do co-production with Korea. Now, how do we do this? How do you do co-production with Korea? And let me explain some things that are about doing co-production with Korea. We do have some co-production treaties. Let me start from the bottom. The first treaty that we made was with France in 2007. And of course, France does a co-production treaty with many, many countries. And I think they probably do most co-production treaties in the world. And actually, they wanted to be the first one to do the co-production treaty with Korea because they were actually in support of Korean screen quota. I don't know if you remember, but we had a screen quota of 146 days per year, mandatory showing of local films. But United States, when we were signing a free trade agreement, they wanted to get rid of it. So many of the Korean filmmakers went out on the street. We were demonstrating, we would like to keep our quota, to keep alive Korean films. Of course, when you think about it now, because the Korean film is performing so well, we don't really need it, but we actually need screen quota as a guarantee. But now it's down to only 70 days, which is meaningless at the moment. Now, the next one we signed was with New Zealand in 2008. Of course, this one actually was replaced with the top one, with the, it's part of annex of a Korea-New Zealand FTA. So when you actually sign a free trade agreement with a certain country, it includes audiovisual work also. So even if you have a co-production treaty, it gets replaced by one of the annexes on a free trade agreement. So that's what happened. So as of 2015, December 20th, it was replaced by this annex on FTA agreement. Now, the next one we signed was with the European Union. Of course, this is also part of FTA with the European Union. I guess it means that we have to sign a new one with England because they're not part of EU anymore. Also, we have also signed one with China in 2015. But actually, this is also a part of also FTA, and it's part of annex also. So whenever we sign free trade agreement with a new country and movie co-production treaty becomes part of the free trade agreement. So I think that's what happened with China also. And also we signed one with Australia. So this was also part of free trade agreement. Of course, we signed one with India also. So we have these co-production treaties. What do you get for doing co-production through co-production treaty? There are some advantages because the reason for doing co-production and becoming an official co-production, it means this movie, although produced by two countries, it actually becomes their own movies. In other words, Korea, New Zealand co-production can be a Korean movie, or it could be a New Zealand movie in New Zealand. So you could enjoy the subsidies and all the sponsorship from both countries, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, in order to be recognized as a Korean film through co-production, we have these recognition evaluation tables. So you have to get 25 points out of these criteria. So first one is production company. Production company is 10 points. So if it's a co-production between two countries, you get 5 points each. And language is spoken, and they'll calculate how much, which language is spoken. So if a Korean language is spoken 50%, then we get 5 points. And the content, this is called, in other countries, called cultural test. So how much of this movie is about Korea or Korean culture? So they'll figure out, and if it has a lot of Korean culture embedded in it, depending on how much of it, you'll get the points. And the creator side gets 16% in total. So director gets 10 points. Director obviously is very, very important. And who wrote the script, and who did the rewrite, and composer. This composer is for music, OST. Personally, this is too little for music. I think they should actually assign more for the music composition because music is such a big part of the movie also. And of course, the actors, including supporting actors, it actually consists of 18 points. And technical creative contributions includes assistant director department, DP department, administration, production department, editor, sound recorder, so on and so forth. It actually includes makeup, gaffer, special effects. And also participants, who are participants, which crew, how many crew, what percentage of crew they be used for the movie, and the location is very, very important. And equipment, where did you rent the equipment, actually also has something to do with the point system. So look at this list and calculate if you can get 25 points. Then for you Koreans, if you can get 25 points, this movie can officially be a Korean movie. The reason for doing this, as I said earlier, is we have around 20 different production funds. And most of them are for Korean local films. So in order for co-production to get funded, this is very important, because this is, when the movie is considered a Korean film, you can get funded from these different funds. Of course, other countries have different rules and different point systems. So when you do co-productions, you need to actually compare both countries' system and point system so that you can qualify in both countries. What are the benefits of co-production? This is actually an obvious point, but I'll actually point it out. Actually, when you make a movie, you have to actually find financing. But when you do co-production, let's say 50-50, that means you only have to find 50% of the funding in your country, and your partner will find the other 50% from their own countries. Also, if movie fails, you kind of share the risk also. So that's a good thing. And like I said earlier, for Korea, you can actually get funded from the various production funds in Korea. So access to local and foreign incentives and subsidies. For example, like Australia and New Zealand, they have something called producers offset. They usually give back 40% of the production budget back to the producer, so that producer can have equity in the movie. Because most of you know that in many of the countries, you only get fees. You don't really see the percentage of the profit. That's because you didn't put any money in, because you were just working on a salary. But in Korea, the production company automatically get 40% of the profit. So it's basically a similar thing in Australia and New Zealand. By doing producers offset, 40%, if you put that money back into the production, they usually do, then you have an equity of 40%. So basically, if you do co-production with Australia and New Zealand, you basically have 40% of the budget already funded. Now all you have to do is find the other 60%. So you can take advantage of different subsidies and incentives in both countries. And of course, it expands the market, because if you do co-productions, usually, hopefully, it can do well in both countries. So instead of just doing well in one country and selling the complete movie to other countries for royalty, it's better to access the market and get the benefit of both box offices. So it has the effect of expanding the market. And what's the disadvantage? Now, usually, who puts how much becomes a big problem, because let's say we do a co-production with China. Of course, China's much bigger market, so we would like to put smaller amount of money. But of course, in Korea, by law, in order to be eligible as a co-production, you have to put at least 20% of the budget. Then you could be qualified as a co-production. But China market is probably more than 5 times. So we would like to put as little as possible, because usually when you do a movie with China, since China market is so big, we have to make a movie China-centric. Usually means that it won't do so well in Korea. So we'll try to take advantage of that market. However, when we do a co-production with a similar size market, then they're usually 50-50. But of course, many of the producers say, our market is smaller, so we need to put a little smaller than you and things like that. So you need to actually figure this out. And also after that, now how gross receipts be recouped and net profits be shared, because different countries, different distribution fees and P&A systems and things like that. So you need to set this beforehand or agree up beforehand. And what about the copyrights? Who owns the copyright after finishing the movie? This usually becomes a problem also. And also, what if you have a fight? Who decides? Whose decision do you follow? Things like that. And what about the credits? Who goes on top and all these things? I mean, this could all be resolved on a co-production contract, and you spell it out and you agree beforehand, then you won't have any problems. However, these are some of the problems. If you don't actually set it and resolve it before signing the contract, this will be problems afterwards. But if you make the rules beforehand, I don't think you'll have any problems. But the most important thing that you have to remember, what subject is good for co-production? How do we find the subject which can appeal to both countries? Because purpose of doing co-production is expansion of the market, like I said earlier, meaning that it really has to do well in both countries. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. Of course, China's a different story because there's such a huge market. We have to make most of our co-production for China-centric. But for other countries, we would really like to make it successful, both countries. So the subject matter has to be interesting for both countries. Now, for example, I'll show you later. I did a movie with Japan one time, co-production. And when we were writing scripts, there are parts only Korean people laugh and Japanese people didn't understand, so we take it out. So there are parts the Japanese people find it interesting, but Korean people did not understand, so we took it out. We kept doing that, and the movie became very bland. So I think it's a part of the reason why the movie didn't perform so well. But so finding a subject is also important, but when you're writing the script, you have to work very, very closely so that when you write certain parts, you have to make sure that both sides understand and both sides has to be interested. So this is a major point that you have to remember. But many, many times people think of co-production as just putting a character in the movie and then becomes a co-production. In the past, these days I don't really get that too much, but in the past, like foreign countries, they were shopping around their script. They can't get financing, so they just changed one character to Korean, second generation Korean or something like that, and bring to Korea. Oh, okay, we have a Korean character. Let's do co-production. This is not going to work. So find a subject that could appeal to both countries. This is very important. Now, these are some of the co-productions that I've done in the past. I have a few more, but I just listed 5 of them. And the first one was like the one that I just mentioned, called Virgin Snow. He starred, at the time, he was a top actor in Korea. He was so popular, Lee Jun-gi, and a lady named Miyazaki Aoi, who was also very, very, very big in Japan at the time. So as far as casting is concerned, it was great. But like I said earlier, when we're writing the script, it's still, you know, I still get the overage from Japan on this movie. It's very nice romantic story, but like I said, it was quite bland because we're taking things out that weren't interesting for either side. So, but I really had a good time doing this co-production because I really like working with Japanese staff because they work very diligently. I'm not saying the Korean staff doesn't, but they were quite good. And also they have a lot less people on the set. So that was great. I think if you have time, look it up. It's a nice little movie. Hope that it did perform better, but it wasn't a very big hit. And next one was something I did with United States. It was an independent film directed by Chris Yu called Wedding Palace. I think it really had a small release in the United States. However, it starred Kang Hae-jung, who was in Old Boy, and Brian T, who was in Fast and Furious. And this was a small film, but it was actually a very cute little story. Then I went to work for CJ, and we did a movie called Wedding Invitation in 2013. It opened in 2013. But this particular movie, Wedding Invitation, was quite interesting because everybody behind the camera was Korean, and everything in front of the camera was Chinese. And actually, this started out as a Korean script, and we actually hired a Chinese scriptwriter. We went back and forth, and this is actually a good example of how co-production worked out really well. We try to make it China-centric, of course, but with a Korean sentiment. All the post was done in Korea. The music composer was Korean, but all the settings and actors were Chinese. And this grossed about 200 million yuan in China, and actually became, at the time, 4th biggest romantic comedies at the time. But of course, that record is broken many times now. But that was one of the success stories. And also, there was a movie called Final Recipe, which was also a co-production with China. Actually, it started out as USA, Thailand, Korea co-production, and actually China became later. It stars Michelle Yeoh and Qin Han. You know, Qin Han is actually one of the few Asian actors who are working very, very aggressively in Hollywood. He was a bad guy in The Dark Knight. He's in a lot of the Marvel films also. Also, he stars young Henry, who's part of Super Junior, and I think he's no more, but he's doing his own thing. He's a very, very talented person. And I really enjoyed working with Michelle Yeoh. She's such a nice lady. And I spent about 6 weeks in Thailand shooting with a Thai crew, and really had a good time. And of course, the movie didn't work out so well, neither. After I came out of CJ, I made my own movie called Making Family, which I thought was quite cute. And it started Kim Han-il from Korea, and Lee Ziting, Arif Lee from China. Actually, he's originally from Hong Kong, and Moon Mason. Nice story, and we actually did quite well making the movie. However, in year 2016, China banned all Korean contents, and this was one of the last ones. And once this thing started, we couldn't get any theaters because China was actually banning all Korean films in China. So unfortunately, this movie did not do so well. But hopefully you could actually find this movie, and it's actually cute. I'm not ashamed of any of the movies that I've made in the past, especially the ones that I co-produced with the foreign countries. I've always had a great time working with the foreign crews. And Wedding Palace was like I said earlier, but it was half shot in States and half shot in Korea, both independently. It was a small film, but I'll show you the trailer of this one as an example.
There is my boy! Please, Jason, you're supposed to be here 45 seconds ago!
For most families, a wedding is a blessing. For Jason,
The cake maker?
marriage is the only way to stop
The curse! The curse! If he's not married in 6 months, he'll die!
You gotta get back on the saddle and giddy up.
Did you right, kid?
You think I am in love with your daddy when we get married? Mommy and daddy fall in love after.
I just need to get away.
I think going to Korea is gonna be good for you.
now a trip to the old country
Mr. Kim?
Call me Jason. No, don't get up.
and one magical night
Thanks for making my last night here so special.
Last night?
will lead to a thoroughly modern kind of love.
Cute, right?
No, Hello Kitty is cute. That's disgusting.
Want some more?
Cheers.
But the ultimate long-distance relationship
We're getting married and she's coming to LA.
is about to come up short.
Little people, little people.
I never saw her standing up.
Sitting down? Calm down. It's okay. Short woman, eat less. I'm sorry.
Why didn't you tell me how short you were?
Do you still want to marry me?
Uncomfortable.
This spring, one little problem will drive a family totally loco.
¿Qué onda ese?
No mames!
I love you
Okay.
so much. I love you. I love
Okay.
The Kim family is throwing the wedding of the season,
you. Good times. Oh, I love mojitos.
and you're invited to rise to the occasion. Wedding Palace.
You look like a handsome prince, huh? When doves cry.
You see, that's pretty cute, right? Apparently, we're getting some overages still from South America. Somehow it's doing quite well in South America, apparently. It didn't do so well in the States. Actually, you can see, I don't know if you noticed, there are a lot of Korean American actors that are actually still very active in Hollywood. They're all in there in this movie. So it was fun. Okay, next up. I'm going to tell you a few ways of co-production. There are different ways of doing co-production, how we start. Let me start with, you can do remakes of a Korean film or your own film into Korean film or co-production. Co-production through remakes. And this is a very, very good example. Some of you probably recognize this movie, 20 Again, Miss Granny. This was remade in many different countries. Original movie was from Korea. CJ is the one who invested and distributed in Korea, and they went on to do co-production in China, Vietnam. Actually, in Vietnam at the time, it broke the record. Also, it did very well in China, and Japan did so-so. Indonesia, Thailand, okay. However, because it was Korean content, original content was Korea, they were able to do co-production with local companies in these different territories. And they're working on Indian language and English language and Spanish language contents. I'm sure those will also become a co-production too. This is one way of doing co-productions. And co-production through joint development. This is what I usually do these days. It's because instead of remaking a movie, Korean movie, into various different countries, there's a good thing about that too, because it's actually proven content. However, you never know because different markets have different audiences. But so what I started doing is I find a subject or a script, or even in this case, it's actually a short film. Subject matter, I find, and I actually contact some of my partners or people that I work with overseas, is see if they will be interested in developing it into their own movies. So in this case, I found this short film from Korea. I'd like to take a trip with your wife, and I've been offering it to different countries. And actually, Taiwan was the first one who made it actually into a movie. Called A Trip with Your Wife, and it actually opened recently. And I had a very, very big hope about this movie because the director, Gavin Lin, had a huge hit previously with a movie called More Than Blue, which was a huge hit in Taiwan, and also it was the biggest Taiwanese movie ever in China, grossing 1 billion yuan. So I had high hopes about this movie, but I don't know what went wrong. I have not seen the final movie because I could not travel to Taiwan for the opening. So we'll try to figure out what went wrong. However, I'm actually working with filmmakers from Indonesia to do an Indonesian version. Let me tell you the setup. This best friends from college, one of them is dying of cancer. He doesn't have very long to live. So the other guy asks, what would you like? I'll do anything for you. And the guy says, well, I'd like to take a trip with your wife. And of course, then what do? Your best friend who's dying is asking you to let you have your wife go on a trip with your friend. So, of course, they get into a fight, although it's your last wish, there are things that you have to, that you can ask and you cannot ask, and you've gone too far. But the thing is that the wife says, it's actually my decision. I'm going to go with him because I was a friend with him also from college. So they go on a very innocent trip, but of course the husband doesn't really think it's innocent. So he secretly follows them around. And of course, they find the very, very, very surprising truth and twist about why he actually asks for the trip. And I really, really like the subject matter. So some of you, if who would be interested in doing this in your country, let me know. I'm interested in doing it in different countries. This is only one example, but it could be, you know, I do this with, I have few other things. When I find a script, if I think it's going to work in different countries, I translate it into English and I send it over to some of my partners. And I am working on 3 or 4 different projects right now on the same script that I found in Korea and from United States also. So this is another way of doing a co-production through a joint development. But this time you start from the beginning. Of course, I'm doing this also, Korean version also. However, if you do this kind of subject matter in Southeast Asia, I can actually ask them to come to Korea as a trip. And this Taiwanese version, they went to Canada, but for example, Indonesian version will come to Korea for the trip. So it'll make a nice co-production. Next one will be the co-production through common interest. Like I said, this is a very important point. Like I said earlier, finding a common interest is very, very important in the co-production. So usually they based on a true story works quite well if both countries involved. And I found a subject, and take a look. This is one with Australia, actually.
Good evening to you. A ship believed to be at the centre of an international heroin smuggling operation tonight is under guard in Sydney Harbour. The North Korean freighter was captured in a joint military and police operation that ended with a daring raid in heavy seas off Newcastle.
Suspected drug mothership, the Pong Su, under control of the Navy and police, being shepherded towards Sydney Harbour. It followed a dramatic joint military and police operation to take control of the container ship. The Pong Su had repeatedly ignored warnings to stop. The Navy was alerted, the frigate Stewart ordered to the area.
You put out a warship with a 5-inch gun on board and people do pay attention.
At first light in heavy seas, the Pong Su was boarded. SAS troops and others trained in anti-terrorist actions raided the vessel from helicopters and small craft.
Securing the vessel for us entailed a demonstration of force this morning and then going into a boarding operation to insert members on board.
Earlier, the police launched Fearless, pursuing the Pong Su, met huge seas, waves up to 10 metres. 2 crew members were injured.
It's a 54-metre vessel. It was turned on its side twice and turned around 180 degrees. And the master of that vessel, the sergeant, decided it was too horrendous to continue.
The chase on the high seas followed the seizure of 50 kilograms of heroin by federal police, worth an estimated $80 million. The drugs were intercepted last Wednesday in the coastal town of Lorne in southern Victoria. 4 men arrested, 3 men charged. A body was also washed up, believed to be connected to the drug traffickers. Police allege the capture of the Pong Su has dealt a major blow to an international drug syndicate. The vessel will sit here at Garden Island for a painstaking search, expected to last 3 days.
Okay, that was what happened in the year 2003. This North Korean ship was carrying, as you see, a big amount of heroin, and they got caught in Australia. And what happened? Of course, as you heard, the crew were captured, and low-ranked crews were sent home, about 30 of them, and the remaining 4 high-ranking crew members were kept there on trial for 3 years. And this movie is about how they were tried, and the lawyer, and they're North Koreans, although they speak Korean, so they don't really have North Koreans living in Australia, so they had to find a South Korean interpreter, this lady, to interpret for these North Koreans. And this is a relationship about these 3 people, the captain, the attorney, and a South Korean interpreter. So let me show you a Korean news clip about this after 3 years for Korean students.
북한 관련 뉴스가 하나 더 있습니다. 지난 2003년 헤로인을 밀반입하다 호주 당국에 납포된 북한 선박 봉수호가 오늘 호주 해안에서 격침됐습니다. 선원들은 이미 풀려났는데 호주는 북한 정부가 마약 밀반입에 개입하고 있다는 의심을 거두지 않고 있습니다. 김승필 기자입니다.
호주군 전투기에서 발사된 미사일이 북한 화물선 봉소를 순식간에 격침시킵니다. 3년 전 호주 당국에 납포됐던 봉소호가 훈련용 목표물로 사용되며 수장됐습니다.
The North Korean government makes sure in future that none of its ships are involved in these sorts of activities.
봉소호는 지난 2003년 천문학적인 액수의 마약 밀수에 이용된 혐의로 북한 승무원 31명과 함께 호주 당국에 납포됐습니다. 이 사건을 놓고 미국과 호주는 북한이 국가 차원에서 마약 밀수에 관여하고 있는 증거라고 주장했습니다. 하지만 호주 대법원은 북한 선원들이 마약이 실린 사실을 몰랐다며 증거 불충분 등으로 최종 무죄 판결을 내렸습니다. 이달 초 풀려난 선원들은 모두 북한으로 귀국했습니다. 재판이 끝난 뒤 북한 측 변호인은 호주 정부가 봉소를 돌려주지 않기로 결정하자 배상을 청구하는 문제를 검토하고 있다고 밝혔습니다. SBS 김승필입니다.
Okay, so what happened was the high-ranking crews were also found not guilty because they decided that they didn't know the drugs are on board, and so they went home, but they didn't actually return the ship. What you saw was they used a fighter jet to actually sink the ship without returning the ship, so to warn the North Korean government that they shouldn't carry drugs anymore. But what makes this topic interesting for me is because it's an incident between North Korea and, of course, Australia. However, people who are involved with North Koreans, and they had to be interpreted by South Korean lady who not only interpreted their language, but they were interpreting how Koreans think, how Korean culture is. She had explained all this to the attorney so that he was able to bring out what's in the captain's mind. Why did he run away? He was able to explain the court that blind submission is something that's very common in North Korea. You have to abide by what your superior tell you, which is something that Western people will never understand, things like that. And also, she was able to open captain's mind by speaking Korean to him and providing some food and things like that. And so I thought this would be a very nice piece for both countries to be involved in. So we're on the second draft right now on this movie, and hopefully, I mean, I don't have any problem finding casting from Korea for the captain and the interpreter, but hopefully, as a lawyer part, somebody like Mel Gibson or Hugh Jackman, we can find somebody like that to play this. I mean, I don't know if we can afford them, but that's our dream. So hopefully it works out. Anyways, this is another way of doing co-production through common interests. So I talked to you about all the different aspects of doing co-production with Korea, and it's very important to expand our horizons to overseas, so not only being stuck into your own country, but it's very important. You know, not many co-productions do well because we always forget the important factor. Like I said earlier, it has to be interesting in both territories. And if it's interesting for both territories, usually audience from worldwide will be interested also. Just remember that and try to make something not only for financing purposes, but something that the movie could perform everywhere. And then you'll be more successful than just doing your local films. And I hope you learned something from today's lecture. I hope you have a fantastic day and have a great rest of the school. Thank you.